Hi everyone, welcome back to another video. Yeah, it has been chaotic for the past few weeks. I think around the world, everything is just kind of taken a turn. Not for the worse in a sense, where I think a lot of countries are going on lockdown, partial lockdown. In Malaysia, we have a restricted movement order where apart from essential services and going out to like a grocery store, no one is allowed to work, no one is allowed to have religious services, no one is allowed to go, the schools are not open, so things like that. So it's a lot of people are feeling a lot of fear from what I can tell. A lot of people are panic buying here, even though, guys, it's only 2 weeks. Yes, they may be extending that 2 weeks, depending if, like, example, people in Malaysia listen. But grocery stores are still open. You can still go and buy stuff, in between. And food delivery services are still in operation. So, but a lot of misinformation, a lot of unnecessary panic, unnecessary chaos is happening. But I'm really confident in, okay, this is a time in history we will remember, and hopefully we learn from, and hopefully we recover well from. Let's just not look at this time as being afraid and take our eyes off of God. We need to keep our eyes on God. We need to keep our eyes on the eternal purpose of God, not just right now, not just in the moment. A lot of us can have a lot of questions on why did God allow this, why didn't God stop this? And we could ask that same question to anything in our lives, anything. But at the end of the day, we look back, not now, we will look back one day, turn back and see the goodness of God in everything, and there is goodness even here. And yeah, it really depends on who you're listening to. What are you focusing on? What good is focusing on what you're focusing on too? So I think there's a lot to be said about this, but I'm not going to go into that this video is specifically on a certain psalm that God has kind of caught my heart. I think the same psalm has caught me, like, I don't know how many years ago, because I read my Bible through my phone on the YouVersion Bible app, where I like to highlight and take notes and whatnot. And I got through that psalm through Bible plans. I read the whole psalm, and it struck me. I read it like a few times in different versions, whatnot. And then when I just went to check on my Bible, which is in New Living Translation, I actually had really underlined it. I circled a couple of verses. So I'm like, oh, I definitely got, struck with this same psalm a long time ago. I got struck by this psalm because it just makes you think, wow, we really do not appreciate God for what He has done for us in everything, And I've been reading a lot about the book of Exodus a lot. So this ties very well with the book of Exodus and the journey of the Israelites after the whole Exodus episode. And it's crazy to see how we as a people who God has rescued, God has decided to save, He didn't need to, but He did, and how gracious and patient He was with the Israelites, with us. So when I'm reading this up, I am not reading it purely from the point of the Israelite going through the journey, or who has gone through the journey, or is looking back on their ancestors who have gone through that journey. I am reading this psalm thinking, this is my story. This is what God has done for me. Because you can take whatever God has done for the Israelites in Egypt and in the wilderness, and you can apply it so easily to your own life. And then you can also find your response, which was the Israelite response. And it's very sobering. It's painful, because you're like, what did we do? And what did you choose to still do? God still chose to cover and carry the Israelites despite how ungrateful they were to God. So I think let's just get into the word, because I'm not sure I'm going to read the whole thing, but maybe I may read the whole thing. Like, I think that's been like my style lately, going through the entire psalm and stopping where the Spirit stops me to speak. So let's go. Psalm 78. O my people, listen to my teaching. Open your ears to what I am saying. For I will speak to you in a parable, I will teach you hidden lessons from our past, stories we have heard and know, stories our ancestors handed down to us. We will not hide these truths from our children, but will tell the next generation about the glorious deeds of the Lord. We will tell of his power and the mighty miracles he did. For he issued his decree to Jacob. He gave his law to Israel. He commanded our ancestors to teach them to their children so the next generation might know them, even the children not yet born, that they in turn might teach their children. God is a God of generation. I think that whole portion, those but 6 verses are all about generation. God is about longevity. He is about eternity. He is a God of eternal purposes. So of course he's going to be a God of, legacy. And I think that's very important. And I feel like a lot of parents don't practice this, sadly. We teach our children about God, what they should know about God, how they should have a personal relationship with God, blah, 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 that stuff. But we don't talk about what God has done in their lives. How has God touched you? How has God impacted you? How has God saved you? How has God delivered you? As my parent, I feel like it's a lot more personal and real to think, oh, you're not just telling me a story, you're telling me your story. And I think that's specifically what God is trying to say here too. Like, we can't hide these truths about God in our lives. We can't hide the truth of our testimony in our lives to our children and our children's children. We should be declaring the works of the Lord in our lives, in the Word of God, in our friends' lives, so that the child will be able to grasp. It reminds me of Samuel. Samuel did not know the voice of the Lord. Why? Eli didn't teach him. And also at that time, hearing a word or a vision was rare in those days, right? But if Samuel was taught before, Eli realized, yeah, he would recognize. But the thing is, he didn't recognize the voice of God. He doesn't know. He knows the works of God. He doesn't know the voice of God. A lot of times, the voice and the work kind of come together. And especially now, post Christ, post having the Holy Spirit and whatnot. We need to teach children what God has done, how God does things, how God has done things. What does the voice of God sound like? Because at one point God will call our children and they need to know that, hey, I can trust this voice. I can move towards this voice. Verse 7. So each generation can set its hope anew on God, remembering his glorious miracles and obeying his commands. Then they will not be like their ancestors, stubborn, rebellious, and unfaithful, refusing to give their hearts to God. Ooh, let's stop here. This is what it's saying. When you teach the next generation about God, what God has done, how God sounds like, what God has done in your life, in your family's life, in your generation's life, whatnot, they can set their hope on God. They can have faith no matter what the obstacle. Because guess what? A lot of these testimonies and stories we have from God come during troubling times. It's not really a testimony if everything's going great and God's just adding on to it. God tends to be missed among the good. But you never miss him when things are going bad. You really take the time to be able to identify and see God very clearly when things are very dark. Because he's light, and light, dark, they're like the opposite. So definitely you can tell there is light in the area or avenue of darkness. But there's a point. So that when you face, because guess what? Our generation and our next generation will face troubling times. They will face darker times. And we need to be able to give them a reason to hope. And remembering his glorious miracles and obeying his commands. I always love how, if you look back at Israel and even God's dialogue with his people when they do disobey, it comes back to them not remembering. It comes back to them not realizing, hey, you forgot. Sometimes I also think back to the times that I've sinned and I realize, oh my goodness, I've forgotten what you've done for me. I have forgotten. I've taken it for granted. And oftentimes, when you take something for granted, it's because you took it out of remembrance. It was not placed in remembrance. You're not reminding yourself the good that God has done in your lives. Or in your case, if you've ever felt like you would take it for granted, it's because you felt like what you've done is forgotten, much less God. So that's very important. And here's the key. That is the key to not be like their ancestors, not be stubborn, rebellious, and, not giving their hearts, is not having a place to set their hope on. So they're looking at other things. You're looking for things. You must find your hope in something, and a lot of times suicide is having more hope in death than in life. Death is safer, less fearful. The pain will stop, that kind of feeling. So suicide is not something to belittle, but you have to understand that's where their hope was found, in death, because death is better than life. I've encountered the similar feeling, and I understand the mindset it takes to actually have those suicidal thoughts, which I struggle with on and off throughout my life. And it really comes down to life is not worth living. That is the hope, and you need that hope. Jesus is the life, that kind of thing. So when you have that hope, you realize that, hey, I can have that hope because I remember. And then when you have that hope and remembrance, you realize I can obey. So whatever God tells me to do right now, I can choose to stand upon it, live in it, and endure. That gives us the strength to endure. And that prevents us from being stubborn, rebellious, and unfaithful. Which is kind of crazy that is like a foundation that you must have. So example, if you are stubborn, rebellious, or unfaithful, refusing to give your hearts to God, or you find someone in your life who's doing that, I can guarantee you there's something that they have forgotten, they have not realized. And often when I counsel people who come to me with problems or whatnot, I almost always have to remind them, hey, what has God done in your life? This is what God has done. And the simplest thing to start with is the gospel. Do you remember what Jesus gave you when he died on that cross? That's when I start teaching people about what you have, what the death of Jesus on the cross, what the resurrection of the Son of God out of the grave, what does that mean for you? And often we don't teach that. We don't remind people what God has done. Like, actually, we don't say, oh, remember the things God has done. We have to say it. We have to say what God has done. Okay, verse 9. This is going to be a long one, okay? The warriors of Ephraim, though fully armed, turned their backs and fled when the day of battle came. They did not keep God's covenant, and they refused to live by his law. They forgot what he had done, the wonderful miracles he had shown them, the miracles he did for their ancestors in Egypt on the plain of Zoan. For he divided the sea before them and led them through. The water stood up like walls beside them. In the daytime he led them by a cloud, and at night by a pillar of fire. He split open the rocks in the wilderness to give them plenty of water, as from a gushing spring. He made streams pour from the rock, making the waters flow down like a river. Let's go back to verse 9 and 11 again. 9 to 11. The warriors of Ephraim, fully armed, turned their backs and fled. Fear, retreat, backsliding. They did not keep God's covenant, and they refused to live by his law. Disobedience, do not keep God's law, refuse to live. That speaks about intention to live by the law. It's one thing to say I want to do it but I can't. It's another thing to say I don't want to do it. And that's the tough part. You can behavior modify all you want, but if your heart's not transformed, the behavior will not be long lasting. And that was the problem. That was the reason why the old covenant was not the eternal covenant. Why we even needed a new covenant in the first place? Because the old covenant could not transform your heart. It can transform your behavior, can curb your behavior, possibly, but guess what? You're still falling short. Jesus' standard is really high. God's standard is perfection, holiness, up. That's the utmost standard. And guess what? We can't, because our hearts are wrong. Our thoughts are wrong. What is inside of us is wrong. Our mechanism was already wrong, let alone, basically, we are just, if you think about it, we're like a factory. We're just producing what we were programmed to. And sin programmed us to sin. That's why it's a sinful nature, not a sinful behavior. We were sinful to the core. And that's why God can't change it from the outside. He has to change it from the inside. And Sadly, we are still trying to do that till this day. You know, we're still trying to change people on the outside, and that's not how it works. The gospel is an inside job, to say that. And that's the thing. They refused to live by the law. They forgot. See, they always tie the two together. They always tie with disobedience with forgetting what God has done. And then they go on this long talk about what God did in Exodus, how he brought his people out of slavery. Painful, torturous, not year long. How many years? 400 years? Was it 400 years they were under slavery or something? So yeah, it was a long time. Long time. Like, not even a joke. And this is what they forgot. And they turned their backs and they refused. They rebelled. Even though he did so much good for them, how he provided for them, how he made a way for them, even though they were weak, unable to fight, God fought for them. He didn't need to, but he did. So let's move on. Verse 17. Yet they kept on with their sin, rebelling against the Most High in the desert. They willfully tested God in their hearts, demanding the foods they craved. They even spoke against God himself, saying, God can't give us food in the desert. Yes, he can strike a rock so water gushes out, but he can't give his people bread and meat. It astonishes me, and it really is difficult for me to read this part, because these are the same people who saw God part the Red Sea. Okay, if God were to part, I don't know, anything in my way, I would be like, you don't forget that. You don't forget that, You learn to kind of go, that awe, that reverence that you will have from that experience is something that you don't just abandon and forget. But that's exactly what happened. They forgot. And worse, they kept sinning, kept rebelling. They willfully tested. Testing is like, prove you can do it. I'm like, at that point, if you can part a sea. Okay, first of all, without even the parting the sea, pillar of fire, a pillar of fire. You destroyed all our enemies with water, but you had a pillar of fire and a cloud follow us day and night. You don't realize follow. It's not like, only when you travel. It was there throughout the journey. You can't miss it unless they became so familiar with it that they forgot, took it for granted again. I don't even know, but yeah, this part scares me. Like, demanding the foods they craved. God is not an ATM machine. He's not a refrigerator. Like, I think, honestly, if I to think back about the Israelites at that time, they remembered God. But I think also when you are surrounded by idols and people who worship idols, they got mixed up. Because if you think about it, the Egyptians worshipped gods that all served a different purpose. This god for this god for that, this god for this. Very similar to other religions you see today. So I think that's why they were testing God, to see what kind of God is he. Maybe he's the God that saves. He's the God that parts the Red Sea and protects. Maybe he's not the God who provides. That's a very interesting concept. I never thought about it like right now. What if it's like the feeling of God can't do it all? It's the same thing that a lot of people tend to feel like you can't have it all, especially women. You can't have it all. You can't be successful in your work and as well as being an awesome home maker. You know what I mean? I know that's false because my mom did it. My grandmother did it. Both working women, both kept their home well, So I believe that because, I can believe that because that's what I've seen. But if the Israelites did not grow up with that, they saw their atmosphere for years. They saw the Egyptians for years. They served the Egyptians. And anybody who's serving you is watching you, and they are observing what you're doing. They know your ins and outs. They know what your routine is like. They have to, so that gets passed around. So I think their mind of how God works was defective. So I think that's also a reason why they were testing him, asking him to prove himself. See, that's the thing. Yes, he can strike a rock or water, but he can't give his people bread and meat. Very interesting theology here. They're like, you can do this, but you can't do that. And how often do we do that to the Lord? Yeah, you can heal me from disease, but no, you can't do this other thing. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's like, wait, if this is God, is there anything he can't do? God is like the ideal. He is the highest of high. What can't he do? And that's difficult for us to, and the reason why a lot of us find it difficult to accept is because, why? We compare God to man. Man can't do it all, so God can't do it all. Our perspective has been made defective or lied to in order to go down that destruction, that kind of thing. Let's just continue. Verse 21. When the Lord heard them, he was angry. The fire of his wrath burned against Jacob. Yes, his anger rose against Israel, but they did not believe God or trust him to care for them. That's exactly why. That's the reason why. I like how it's not the reason that they sinned. It's not because they did something wrong. They did not believe God, did not trust him to care for them. That at the root of everything is why we sin. There is no sin that if you believe God 100%, you wouldn't sin. Absolutely not. If you're not struggling, it's a fight of faith, not a fight of will, not a fight of thought, a fight of faith. What do you believe in? Because when you believe in something wholeheartedly, when you trust in something wholeheartedly, your mind, I don't care what your thoughts are thinking, somehow you are brave enough to align it to that. You will make a thought. You will find a thought that aligns with your faith, whatever it is. Faith in yourself, your thoughts will align. Faith in your marriage, your thoughts will align. Faith in your boss or your job or your money or your health. If your trust and faith and hope, and if you're cashing in on that, faith-wise, you will cash out everything else. It will follow. Where your faith is, you will follow. So everybody's got faith in something. Everyone. It's just a matter of what. That's sad to say. Not even who, it's what now. But that's how it starts. Verse 23. But he commanded the skies to open. He opened the doors of heaven and rained down manna for them to eat. He gave them bread from heaven. They ate food of the angels. God gave them all they could hold. He released the east wind in the heavens and guided the south wind by his mighty power. He rained down meat as thick as dust, birds as plentiful as the sands along the seashore. He caused the birds to fall within their camp and all around their tents. The people ate their fill. He gave them what they wanted. But before they finished eating this food they had craved, while the meat was in their mouths, the anger of God rose against them, and he killed their strongest men. He struck down the finest of Israel's young men. But in spite of this, the people kept on sinning. They refused to believe in his miracle, so he ended their lives in failure and gave them years of terror. Even though he was angry at what the Israelites were saying, he still gave them what they wanted. That's wild. God will still give, even when he's angry. He knows the Israelites what they were doing are wrong. He still gave, still provided. He gave them what they desired. God didn't shorten his hand, and he gave it to them. And he only just gave them one restriction, collect for the day what you need. Don't keep it. Because that's the thing, like they didn't trust that God would give food every day. Give us this day our daily bread. They didn't believe that. They believed that God was short-handed. He's going to take it away. But as again, it comes back to their mentality while they were in Israel. That was their mentality. Their mentality was, if I don't collect now, I will not have food later. Again, this is showing not just to God what their state was, but also to us, and what slavery did to their minds. What being surrounded by idols did to their minds, their hearts, their attitude. This is not just one Israelite, guys. It wasn't just one person out of like the however many Israelites. These were a lot of them. They all thought that same way. And they didn't all work the same jobs while they were in in Egypt. But they were all enslaved and they were taught that mindset. See, in the end, slavery's purpose was to get you to hope in other gods. Really, at the end of the day. And that tainted their mind. And that's when God's anger rose. See, okay, this is something that always boggled me. If I see God get angry because of sin and then smite a bunch of people, literally kill a bunch of people at one go, you really think I would keep sinning? No, none of us would. Logically, we are like, none of us would. It's like, why would I just saw you do that? I'm terrified. I'm traumatized right now. I'm traumatized enough by slavery. How is it that the Israelites were more obedient in slavery than they were in freedom? Because here's the thing. Slave masters were, not the word irrational, but I guess irrational. They will beat you even if you do the right thing. But God, if you do the right thing, nothing's going to happen. It's a righteous thing. I think the people of Israel also saw God as like their slave master. They'll beat us no matter what. He's going to spite us no matter what. So you might as well keep on sinning. It's very fascinating. Because I think these are also meant to show us, hey, slavery didn't just stop after you left Egypt. That slavery was still there, still in their minds, still in their wills, still in their hearts. They were traumatized. And I think effectively their DNA was changed in a sense, like the DNA of their hearts were changed. They didn't see God the way Abraham did all those years ago, before slavery, In spite of this, the people kept on sinning. They refused to believe. It's like even what God did wasn't enough. I know I'm saying this, it sounds ridiculous, but it's almost as if God was like, God knows this, of course. I think he did this to illustrate to us, to show us, hey, this is the reality of you. This is how you are, or how you were before, the Savior came and saved you. This is what he saved you from. But it's crazy. They refused to believe in his miracles that they just saw, that they witnessed time and time again. How do you refuse to believe in something that you see? It's one thing to believe in something that that you see, like you don't see. It's one thing. Yeah, it makes sense. Oh, I'm not going to believe because I don't see it. Fair enough. It makes sense. You need that faith to believe that. But what do you do when you saw it? You experienced it. You were the byproduct, the result, the ending of that. How do you not believe miracles? Your whole life is a miracle. Like, what? That makes no sense to me. But it does, because slavery screws your mind. It really did. It messed them up. Verse 34. When God killed some of them, the rest finally sought him. They repented and turned to God. Finally, they got it. Then they remembered There we go. Because they didn't remember him before. They refused to remember even. Then they remembered that God was their rock, that their Redeemer was the Most High. They followed him only with their words. They lied to him with their tongues. Their hearts were not loyal to him. They did not keep his covenant. Yet he was merciful and forgave their sins and didn't destroy them all. Many a time he held back his anger and he did not unleash his fury, for he remembered, God remembered, that they were merely mortal, gone in a moment like a breath of wind, never to return. It's kind of like a roller coaster, isn't this? This psalm is like a roller coaster to me. And guess what? So is many of our Christian lives, that we are like up and down, woo, 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 when it comes to our faithfulness and devotion to God. So yeah, they finally realized after God killed some people, God killed some people to kind of get them to wake up somehow. Some people, not just one person, some people. They repented, they remembered. Short-lived. Because guess what? They followed him only with their words. They lied to him with their tongues. They said one thing, hypocrisy, and did something else. So this is where the deceptions started coming. This is where the two-faced, the duality started coming in. I recently watched a sermon by Eric Ludy, I think that's how you pronounce his name, about I can't remember the title. It's like pastors who live a double life or something like that. Okay, like apart from that crazy title, you watch that sermon, I cannot. It struck me to the heart because I felt so convicted. Like, am I living a double life? Am I living one way when in reality I'm not? Am I living so that people see me as one way when in reality I am so not whatever I'm trying to portray? And this is the thing. Their hearts were not loyal. They did not keep his covenant. I feel like at this point it became more of a, they honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. That thing, it started here. They were doing the right things, but their hearts were somewhere else. They were thinking somewhere else. They were probably saying, no, God doesn't trust him. So like, they were saying to God, God, you're my rock, you're my redeemer. But inside, they were thinking, you can't provide. You're gonna hurt us. Why should I trust in you? That kind of thing. Like, they sinned in their hearts. Oof, it's hard. But God, merciful, forgiving, and didn't destroy it. Many times he held back his anger. I sometimes think, God, how much have you held back? Sometimes we think, oh, this is God's judgment on the world. And I'm like, if this is God's judgment, he would have wiped us out. If you really think this is the worst he can do, no. I don't think this is bad enough to even justify a judgment. And that's how bad this is. And that's how bad God's judgment can actually be. Like, we have no idea what we're talking about. Sometimes when we talk about the judgment of God, the wrath of God, we have no idea. We love to take every disaster, every like national crisis or something, and say, it's the judgment of God. And I'm like, who made you judge? You do realize that only the judge can make a judgment? That's the whole point. No lawyer can make a judgment, no counsel, no client, no officer of the court, not even another court's judge. The judge of the court can only make the judgment. As a lawyer, that's something that I understand so well. So it's very irritating to me when I hear people just say that out loud without thinking. We quote Bible scriptures about judgment without thinking. Is this what it is or not? You are the judge. Have you asked the judge what the judgment is? If you've asked him and that's what he said, it's a different story. But I've never heard anybody tell me, this is what God said to me. This is God's judgment. No, we make assumptions. We think this is what God's judgment looks like. And I'm like, no. Because guess what? If that's the case, everything in our lives can be looked at as judgment. Everything. It doesn't work that way, guys. Judgment doesn't work that way. Not in the real world. Definitely not in the heavenly world, which is kind of crazy. But yeah. I was going off topic because it gets me very irritated when I hear things like this. Every time something about like a national or worldwide proportion comes up, it's very frustrating. And I'm like, can we hold it together we're so judgment oriented that, like, guys, are we gonna forget to live? Because guess what, if you are so judgment minded, you won't think about repenting. That's the problem with that mentality, is because when you are always just so judgment, everything about judgment, you think that you're done. Because guess what, judgment means finality, the end of something. You don't give 10 judgments for one thing. God gives mercy, grace for an extended period of time until there is judgment. And when there is judgment, you're not going to get 10 judgments for the same thing. And that is a problem I'm seeing. People are saying judgment for the like the same thing. And I'm like, God is not boring. No judgment is alike, because no case is alike. And you can't give, 10 different judgments or 10 succeeding judgments. You know what I mean? So that's why it gets me annoyed, because I'm like, you're talking things without base. I've not heard a lawyer who knows the Bible talk about judgment like that. It's usually lay people who don't understand how the system works. And that's why, when we talk about court systems and judgment and God being a judge and God being our advocate, it makes sense, because that's the context. That's how he wants us to understand and relate to him. I'm shocked that no lawyers actually speak about this, because it's very fascinating to read about and learn about, the judgment throne and courtroom of heaven, stuff like that. Oh, I'm going way off tangent. Okay, let's go back to the word. God remembers that we are mere mortal. I love this part, because God's like, yeah, I know you. I know what you're like. And also he knows that he has to change us. We have to be changed. Our mortality was driving us. Our fear of death was trying to save us. It's kind of ironic, but yeah. Verse 40. Oh, how often they rebelled against him in the desert and grieved his heart in the wilderness. Again and again they tested God's patience and frustrated. Another word for it is actually limited the Holy One of Israel. They forgot about his power and how he rescued them from their enemies. They forgot his miraculous signs in Egypt, his wonders on the plain of Zoan. For he turned their rivers into blood, so no one could drink from their streams. They sent vast swarms of flies to consume them, and hordes of frogs to ruin them. He gave their crops to caterpillars. Their harvest was consumed by locusts. He destroyed their grapevines with hail and shattered their sycamores with sleet. He abandoned their cattle to the hail, their livestock to bolts of lightning. He loosed on them his fierce anger, all his fury, rage, and hostility. He dispatched against them a band of destroying angels. He turned his anger against them. He did not spare the Egyptians' lives by handing them over to the plague. He killed the oldest son in each Egyptian family, the flower of youth throughout the land of Egypt. But he led his own people like a flock of sheep, guiding them safely through the wilderness. He kept them safe, so they were not afraid. But the sea closed in upon their enemies. He brought them through to the border of his holy land, to this land of hills he had won for them. He drove out the nations before them. He gave them their inheritance by lot. He settled the tribes of Israel into their homes. I like how every time we read about the disobedience of Israel, you read like this part, this much. And then when you see what God has done, it's like 3 times that. It's like this. And you're like, why? What love is this? How often they rebelled. They grieved God's heart. That is something that you don't hear, you don't see, we don't understand. We grieve his heart with what we do. How our rebellion grieves his heart. It makes his heart ache. Because he loves us. That love is there. That care is there. They tested God's patience. They limited, frustrated, limited. It's like saying God's hand is short. God's hand is short. God's hand is short. And even when he stretches out his hand, you're like, I don't want a hand that's stretched out. That's limiting God. You're not even allowing God to be God, because you're not going to take it. You're not going to take what he offers. He offers peace, you're not taking it. He's offering faith, you're not taking it. He's offering you strength, endurance, love, you're not taking it. Your belief was even limiting your behavior in a sense. And then we hear about this is what he did for the Egyptian, like against the Egyptians, his anger was against their enemies. A God who fights like that for my enemies. Can you just imagine going through that right now? Right now, we are just going through one type of sense of the word plague, if you think about it. Not only the plague, but you know what I mean, But it's scary. How do you go back from 10 plagues of mass proportion where you were saved from everything? How are you so apathetic apart from all of this? It's crazy. Oof. And not just that. After that, he kept saving them. He kept guiding them, kept them safe, provided for them, drove out their other enemies. God did everything for them. What did the Israelites do? They were weak, helpless, dumb. They didn't know how to fight. So God did everything for them. They were like a baby coming out of Egypt. If anything, out of Egypt wasn't just a baptism, it was a birth. They were birthed out of Egypt. And now God, like the parent that he is, he's taking care of them, guiding them, helping them grow. But verse 56, yet though he did all this for them, they continued to test his patience. They rebelled against the Most High and refused to follow his decrees. They turned back and were as faithless as their parents had been. They were as useless as a crooked bow. They made God angry by building altars to other gods. They made him jealous with their idols. See, the idolatry mindset followed them even after this God. But I don't think they were sure. I think it came down to they were not sure of their God. Like how it mentions their fathers have been as their parents, they turned back and were as faithless as their parents. Their parents didn't teach them to be better than them. It's kind of crazy. They made God angry by building altars. They succumbed to the mindset that they were born into, that they were brought up in. They went back to what's familiar. They couldn't go back to Egypt. They wanted to at one point when the Egyptians were coming after them. They would rather go back to slavery than die. And I think at one point it was too unfamiliar, it's too uncertain, so they had to bring back what's familiar. And guess what's familiar? Idols. They were surrounded by them. They served them indirectly. Verse 59. When God heard them, he was very angry and he rejected Israel completely. Then he abandoned his dwelling at Shiloh, the tabernacle where he had lived among the people. He allowed the ark of his might to be captured. He surrendered his glory into enemy hands. He gave his people over to be butchered by the sword because he was so angry with his own people, his special possession. Their young men were killed by fire. Their young women died before singing their wedding songs. Their priests were slaughtered, and their widows could not mourn their deaths. All this happened because they committed idolatry, which I've mentioned in a previous video is the start of every other sin. When you see idolatry, you will see every other sin come into play. And God will not have idols. No one can stand before him. That's his one thing. I feel like there's so many trigger points when it comes to God. Sin is a general trigger point. Idols. Really another God. Really someone else. He is one true God. That's it. There is no other God. Absolutely no other God. False gods, yes. Your gods you can make with your hands, yeah. But none of them have power. None of them can do anything. Which is why I'm not threatened by other religions. I don't believe in them. For me, it's very simple. I'm not afraid if I am not threatened by living in a country of another person's religion. I am not threatened when I'm in a community full of other people who believe in another religion. I am not threatened at all. Why? I don't believe in their gods. It's very simple. I don't believe there is any other God. That is what I believe, And yet, we're living in a society that gets so upset and angry. Have you noticed God doesn't, if you notice, right, throughout the Bible, God doesn't speak to anyone apart from himself. He doesn't speak to the false gods. Ever. He never addresses the false gods. Ever. Why? They don't exist. You know what I mean? We don't believe in any other God. Christians find it so hard to say that out loud. We say, I respect your religion. That's what I say. Yep, I respect that's what you believe. I don't believe in your gods. I say that very plainly. I don't believe in your gods. It's very simple. My God is real. Of course, everybody who believes in their own faith will say that, oh, my God is real too. But I'm like, my Bible says otherwise. My Bible actually says otherwise. God actually says otherwise. There is no other God. No other God worthy. That's why it's such an affront. That's why it's such an insult to God when we make idols. Because guess what? We do make idols. God is not created by man. To an extent, religion is not created by man either. Idols, yes. Idols were made by man. Because guess what? We need to serve something. If we don't serve anything, life is not worth living. And even when life is not worth living, death is a god to many people. I mean, aren't there like God of death or something? I'm sure there is a God of death. Like, I mean, the angel of death. We know that from our scripture, but like the Grim Reaper, like that kind of thing, Some people worship death. They long for death more than life, which is very sad, but yeah. Verse 65, we're almost at the end of the psalm. Then the Lord rose up as though waking from sleep, like a mighty man aroused from a drunken stupor. He routed his enemies and sent them to eternal shame. Isn't this wild? God's like, yep, I'm going to let the enemies have their hand over you because you obviously want to go after other gods. So yeah, let's see how your gods fare with this enemy. Okay, go have fun. And then at some point, God's like, okay, you're done now. Remove the enemies. God goes against the enemies that he actually sent. Kind of crazy if you think about it. Like, think of the sovereignty of God. Like, God is like, yep, I can send it to you, and then I'll also punish what I just sent. And I'm like, what? It's very fascinating, very interesting, scary too. Verse 67. But he rejected Joseph's descendants. He did not choose the tribe of Ephraim. Back to Ephraim running away. He chose instead the tribe of Judah, Mount Zion, which he loved. There he built his towering sanctuary, as solid and enduring as the earth itself. He chose his servant David, calling him from the sheep pens. He took David from tending the ewes and lambs and made him the shepherd of Jacob's descendants, God's own people, Israel. He cared for them with a true heart and led them with skillful hands. A lot of times we don't like to look at this, but leadership is often in the people of God's hands. Recently in Malaysia, I'm not sure whether you've heard or you're updated on the news recently, we've had a very confusing time of leadership in our government, where just when you thought after 60 years we finally get a change of government, and then in a moment it just changed in a week, and now we suddenly have a new prime minister, we have a new cabinet, and people are not happy. People are not happy at all, because they felt this is not the government we voted for, this is not the government that we wanted. So now we will tolerate, we will accept it, because we have no choice, in the matter. But it's interesting that if you look in the Bible, leadership is in God's hands. Government is in God's hands. Authorities are in God's hands. God knows how to pull down and how to set up. And God doesn't simply do things. Often God does this as a response from his church, from his people. And if you look here, God gave them up because of the disobedience. And then, God chooses to reject due to their response as well. But then you see God put David on the throne. And he doesn't mention Saul at all here, because guess what? Saul was what the people wanted. And what the people wanted did not actually want what God wanted. And that's what was the problem. But David wanted what God wanted. And so God put him up there. And that's when the leadership of Israel went in the right direction, up until, the whole Bathsheba incident and whatnot. And then sadly Solomon, and then sadly the official split between, the north and the south. But I think what I'm trying to say is that we really need to know our Bible. We need to know our history. And that's why the Old Testament is so important. A lot of us are so New Testament that we forget the Old Testament. The whole point of the New Testament is so that we understand the Old Testament now in a different light. If you read the Old Testament by itself, great, you'll get so much from that alone. But when you read with the New Testament, you read it with the now salvation of Jesus Christ that has been given, that has been bought, that is free for all, for anyone to accept. It's different. Your eyes are open. You realize, wow, what is this? What am I? How do I become who I'm supposed to be? That kind of feeling. So we really need to remember who our God is. And how do we know who our God is? This. We have been given this privilege, this honor to hold this, to have this. This is a really old Bible. I've had this Bible since I was 16 when I got confirmed in my church. I am now 27. This is 11 years old, and I love this Bible because look at how battered it is. It's really it's really battered, but this is the word of God, and this is the word that God speaks to us through. This is where his Spirit teaches us through, shows us, guides us into all truth. And that's the thing, if you don't know the truth, how can you believe in the truth? How can the truth set you free? You don't even know the truth. You know what I mean? So I don't know, I was just thinking about how the Israelites did not remember. And I think that's my message for today, is remember your God. Don't forget who your God is. Don't forget what he's done. Especially in these trying times, it's very easy to be so focused on the problem, so focused on the news, on the stats, on the number of, fatalities and whatnot. But we need to remember who our God is and what is his plans, what are his purposes, what is his plan for you, what is his purpose for you, why are you here, what is your role to play in this? Because guess what? In every situation, you have a role. You have a mission. You have an assignment. What is your assignment? It can be so simple. Your assignment may just be to keep the peace at home. Your assignment may be to take care of your neighbor. Your assignment may be to encourage people with your words. Call out people. Encourage them with the word from the Lord, Example, in my case, this may be my role, just to make a video or two here and there. To be at home, cook for my family, pray. We all have a role to play, but guess what? Our role is not to have fear, to be in panic, to lose hope. We've seen this happen. We've seen worse than this. The Israelites have seen worse than this. Honestly, whatever we are going through right now is actually it's an act of grace if you think about it, compared to what we read in the Bible. If you actually read your Bible, you would realize that God could do a lot worse, guys. I think we're okay. I know we're not okay, but we are okay. and we need to pray for the world. We need to pray for the countries who are really, really suffering greatly, especially like Italy, South Korea. Where else have been amping up a lot lately? I think there's one more country, even America. I know there are a lot of new cases. People are scared, and the problem is when you are afraid, you make bad choices. So keep the courage up, keep the hope up, keep declaring God. I love seeing all the churches at this time. I think that's what's very nice to see, is all the churches kind of really group up and have a sense of unity, have a sense of, hey guys, look up, let's keep praying, let's keep hoping, let's keep believing, God will turn this around, and this phase will come to an end. I love this tweet that I saw going around. I'm not sure whether you've seen it, in Italy, how everything's on lockdown and the river is finally cleared up. You can actually see the river. You see swans come in. And I was just thinking, how beautiful is that? And who would have thought it just takes, something like this to get people off the street, to heal a river. How, it's such a weird thing to see, and it makes you think God has a plan. I know it's rough, I know people are dying, people have died, but God has a plan. So let's just trust and hope and believe in that. So I wish all of you well. I pray that all of you are safe and you're healthy and you are safe at home, and be with your family, love, laugh, pray, and keep hoping. The light is at the end of the tunnel, and our God is sovereign. Our God is on the throne. Our God is the light, and he's not just the light at the end of the tunnel, he's the light in the tunnel. So while we're in this, we're going to go through this, and we're going to go this as a whole, as a family, as a church family. And one day we're going to look back on this and we're going to see how good was God, what God has done for us in the midst of all of this. Whatever the enemy brings, let's leave him out of this. The enemy's fear, we're not bringing into our homes. We're not bringing him into our lives. We're going to bring the truth, the Spirit of God into our homes, into our lives, to be able to worship and honor the true God. We're not going to honor fear. We're not going to honor chaos. We're not going to honor panic. We are going to honor the Lord. Also pray for all those who are in healthcare, and the doctors and nurses and people who are tirelessly working, people who are working in the stores, people who are cleaners, people who are working in the banks and essential services. Just pray for all these people, because guess what, guys? They're out there, so you can actually have something to go out there for. So be thankful for our leadership. Pray for our leaders, our people in government, to be able to navigate and to help everything be arranged, and they know what to do, and that God is giving them divine instruction and wisdom on how to handle this. So yeah, we need to pray, and because there's only so much we can do, but God can do anything and everything. So let's just keep our world in prayer. It is a very good opportunity for the church to band together, one mind, one purpose, and also speak the message of the gospel. Even in the midst of all this, we can speak the gospel anywhere and everywhere. So yes, I'm gonna leave you to it. Yes, it's a 1 hour long video, but that's just my style, I guess. So God bless all of you, and I will see you in the next video. Bye bye.